we have here is a beautiful beaded purse. So these beads that you see are all glass beads, and it's quite amazing because this purse, it looks so delicate, but when you pick it up, it is actually quite heavy because of the glass beads. So you'll notice that this purse is a drawstring purse. And this was a style that was very popular for purses in the early 20th century, specifically in the 1920s and 30s. I kind of like to think of this style of purse as the daughter of another purse that we'll be talking about today, known as the Reticule. As you can see, this purse has a beautiful pattern on it with these kind of diamond shapes. It's very Art Deco, and to me, this whole purse reminds me of something that a flapper would wear. I can definitely see this purse being super complimentary to a bejeweled beaded flapper dress. These tassels especially remind me of the tassels that you find on flapper dresses, which make the dresses so fun to watch when flappers are dancing. Now, I'm not sure whether this purse was handmade or if it was machine made, but there are a couple inconsistencies in the beading which lead me to believe that it was likely handmade. Now, if we look inside, you can see that this purse is actually silk lined, and it is coming apart a little bit due to age, though other than the slight tearing on the inside lining, this purse is actually in remarkable shape for its age. And what that tells me is that this definitely was not an everyday purse. This was an evening purse that was used for going out, and was probably only used on very special occasions. This was not something that you were wearing every day. And that makes sense because you can clearly see that this purse was a fashion accessory more than a utility. Purses of this size were meant to be worn on the wrist, and they would only hold a couple of items, such as a packet of cigarettes, a lipstick, possibly a handheld mirror, and that's probably about it. So this purse was donated to us from a local member of our community, as the majority of all of our items are. And so I love to think about how this purse made its way in our community and how it traveled around in our community in the early 20th century. Agassiz is not a large town, and it was certainly smaller in the 1920s, which tells me that this may have been the donors' possibly grandmothers or mothers, something that was passed down through generations and has probably traveled through quite a few different areas. Nevertheless, I'm very grateful that this purse made its way into our collection because it is just gorgeous. You can find similar purses made today that evoke the style of purses of the 1920s and 30s. But when you're looking at these purses that are actually of the era, there is a stark difference in the way that purses were made in the early 20th century compared to the purses that are made today. There is such a level of craftsmanship and quality that is very hard to find nowadays. It's clear that every bead was lovingly hand sewn onto this purse. with the intention that someone would treasure it and pass it down through generations. And I think it's so wonderful that they did. Nowadays, that is something that is very hard to do because of the materials that our clothing is made out of. However, of course, it's not impossible. There are still many people who dedicate their lives and their craft into creating things like this purse that evoke 20th century fashion and the quality and craftsmanship that came with it. Alright, so this purse here is called a handkerchief sachet. And the reason it's called a handkerchief sachet, well, one, of course, is because you would put your handkerchiefs in it. So this was mostly used in the Victorian era. These were usually made out of very fine fabrics. This one in particular is made out of silk. And as you can see, these are hand-painted little flowers that were probably painted on by the person who made and was using this handkerchief sachet. And the sachet part is because in this little pillow area here, they probably would have put scents like roses or lavender inside in order to keep the handkerchiefs smelling fresh. So how this would have worked is kind of like a modern tissue box. You would put your handkerchief inside, you would close it up with this little button, and then when you needed to, you can undo it and just pull one out. So it would have been very convenient if you were traveling or visiting someone and you needed a handkerchief, but of course you had to conceal them in a purse, because in the Victorian era it would have been very improper to just be waving about your handkerchief. So you needed a nice delicate handkerchief sachet. Now something that's kind of fascinating about these handkerchief sachets is that a lot of young women actually use them to conceal secret items. Now what these secret items were would have depended on the young girl who was using it, but things like love notes and calling cards, brooches, things like that were often hidden within handkerchief sachets, which I think is quite fascinating. Now this handkerchief sachet also has these little details on the side, and we think that there probably would have been a button on each of these corners that these loops would have hooked around that are now missing. Inside the handkerchief sachet, there is padding. And sometimes these are called handkerchief pillows because they do feel quite like a pillow. Now, I've done a bit of research on handkerchief sachets, and I haven't come up with a conclusive answer on why these would have been stuffed. One reason may be because it would have kept the scents fresher, or maybe because it would have kept any belongings inside from being damaged. Women may have also used handkerchief sachets for storing lingerie, and to me that would make a little bit more sense why they would need to be so protected. I hope you can see the details of the hand-painted flowers, because I just love items where you can really see the hand that made them. I really love to imagine a young girl in the Victorian era preparing this handkerchief sachet and lovingly painting each and every flower. It's very common to see hand-painted flowers on handkerchief sachets, and I just think that's a really beautiful touch. You don't often see a lot of people wearing items that they've made themselves in today's day and age, and I think that's a really beautiful lost tradition of past eras. this next purse is a really interesting one. As you can see, it has a very unique shape. And the reason it has this unique shape is because the reticule was invented during a time of transition. So the reticules rose to popularity and were invented in the 18th century and were used commonly up until the 1920s. So this shape came about when women and their dresses were shrinking in size. If you think about 18th century dresses, they were very large and poofy with lots of room under the skirts to hide the objects that women needed in their day-to-day lives. But as fashion shifted and women's dresses were becoming slimmer, they could no longer hide their belongings underneath their skirt. So they brought the pocket outwards, and that's why you get this sort of pocket-like shape. Now, in the 18th century, this was a point of controversy. People were a little bit scandalized by the reticule because it was pocket-shaped. They thought it was distasteful for something that is supposed to be kept hidden and on the inside of the skirt to be displayed outwards. So these reticules are sort of a drawstring bag. They have these little rings that hold the string in place, and then you can pull the string when you need it to be tighter and open it when you need to put your items inside. Reticules gained the nickname Reticules because women started to become mocked for wearing reticules, specifically when they overstuffed their reticules with too many items, because the reticules were supposed to be delicate and dainty on a woman's wrist. So you couldn't be overstuffing your reticule, otherwise you would be ridiculed. So this reticule is made with glass beads and metal beads. This was very common for reticules of the 1920s, and they were often made and beaded by the woman who would be wearing them, which you'll notice is a common theme throughout some of the purses that we're talking about today. It was sort of a status symbol for women to make their own reticules and match them to their going out outfits. This type of reticule is what you would consider a evening purse. This wasn't to be worn in the daytime. This was to be worn when you were going out in the evening. So this reticule would have been worn on the wrist, hanging off delicately. And I love to just imagine a woman in the 1920s wearing this on her wrist at night, and imagining how this would have glittered as she walked. Whenever we're looking at textiles from our archive, I always love to try to imagine the person that would have been wearing this, because we don't always have that information, so sometimes I do have to use my imagination. And I love to imagine a young girl in the 1920s making this purse and then wearing it for a night out. Maybe a night of dancing, or a night of going out with her friends, meeting a love interest. It's always so interesting to think about the life that this item lived before it came to live with us. So here we have a lovely cream-colored beaded purse that was probably used around the 1920s. 1920s and 30s. Each bead was probably hand beaded by the person who was wearing it, or maybe by someone who the owner would have known, and it could have been given as a gift. Now, this purse didn't come with a date on when it was made or when it would have been used, so it's a bit of a guessing game. But to me, this pattern feels very Art Deco, which places it closer to the 1930s. Now, something that's interesting about this specific purse is its handle. As you can see, it came with a strap that would have been worn around the hand so that you could wear this purse as a clutch. This was very popular in purses of the 1920s and 30s, as bags that you would wear over your shoulder had not really risen in popularity yet. This clutch opens with a clasp that you pull back in order to open it up. And inside you will find a mirror. Inside is lined with what feels like satin, although it's become a little bit worn due to time. Also inside is a ribbon. We don't have a story on this ribbon. I don't know if it was of the era that this purse was made, or if it was added later. But it's always interesting to think about the story behind each of these purses. There are a couple details that lead me to believe that this purse was hand beaded. Some of the lines are a little bit shaky, and there are some inconsistencies in some of the patterns of the beads. But to me, that just makes this purse so much more charming and beautiful. It makes me want to try my hand at beading my own purse, but I'm sure that I would never be able to create something quite as beautiful as this one. I think this style of clutch worn on the hand is a really unique and delicate touch that should come back into fashion. As much as I love my large shoulder strap bags, there's something really delicate and beautiful about something that is just supposed to be worn on the hand. I absolutely love this element on the top. The beads are a little bit inconsistent, and to me that really just brings out the hand that made this purse. This has been ASMR in the archives with the Agassiz Harrison Museum. We are located in Agassiz, British Columbia, within the Fraser Valley. And if you ever find yourself in the Fraser Valley area, I highly suggest that you come give us a visit. We have so much fascinating history that is waiting to be explored. If you would like more information on our exhibits or programs, then please visit our website. That'll be linked in the description. Thank you for watching.